to the Pledge of Allegiance. We'll wait for Vice Chair Salzman. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thanks everybody for showing up, and Commissioner Brimhall is appearing telephonically, and you're still there, James? Correct?
Is your speaker on?
Can you hear me, James? We might have lost him.
He was there.
Yeah.
Oh, he's here. All right. Well, we're moving on. There's nobody in the room except for staff and commission. So I'm going to waive reading call to the public, if that's okay with everybody. We're going to move on to minutes. Agenda item C1. Consider approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission held on March 24, 2020, which is included in our packet immediately following our agenda. Anyone have a chance to review these minutes?
I reviewed them, and I move that we approve them.
Excellent. Commissioner Smith moves to approve the minutes of March 24, 2022. I'll second that motion. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
And James?
Yep, I'm good with that.
Okay, then it is a unanimous vote. Thank you. New business, item D1, discussion and consideration of amending Title 17, Chapter 17.60, CR, Commercial Recreational Zoning District. And I'll turn that over to our Community Development Director, Lloyd.
Good afternoon, everybody. Planning and Zoning Commissioners. Thank you for your time this evening. This is the third time we've visited the commercial recreational, and so I hope you guys had an opportunity to review the definitions I presented. The first definitions, I pulled some more of those in this sheet on your desk. These were some of the items that I initially recommended, and then these items, the additional ones, are brought right out of these definitions from the APA, the American Planning Association, for commercial recreation. And then I went and looked at other communities too, and basically a lot of theirs was based off of the APA definitions. They had some variations here and there. So yeah, what I would like to consider is, because we've already been through this is the third time now, maybe just go by the items for consideration and start with those, and maybe discuss each one. Or how do you guys want to handle that? Do you want to vote on each one, yes or no, or do you want to go through each item and add or subtract and make a motion at the end, or how do you want to proceed? Did everyone get a chance to review all the commercial recreational? We have a new commissioner, Tim Kinsley. Did you get a chance to review that? Okay.
I have a couple of questions.
Good.
Does anyone know how long this has been an ordinance in Pinetop?
I do. So it was initially put into effect in 1990. There's one parcel that's zoned commercial recreation. 1990 was the first.
And
There's been amendments.
One parcel in the entire town.
Correct.
And what parcel is that?
It's Camp Grace, and we were hoping to have Jennifer Brimhall on the Zoom call tonight, but we do have feedback in the minutes, and that's partially why they're included. Also, the council feedback from when we brought it to council the first time in January, I believe it was. Yeah. So that's why that's included. I know that there's some other items in there. We should have taken those out to eliminate any confusion, but the item that particularly of interest is the commercial recreational that went before the council, and the discussion between them and I, and how they appreciated your guys' efforts, but they wanted us to really hone down the palette of uses allowable in that zone, as opposed to eliminating all of them. They wanted us to be more specific. And so that was the big thing.
Give us some time, and that's just eliminate the entire commercial recreational zone.
I agree.
Because I don't see any need for it. Ms. Brimhall would still have her zoning. She she'd be grandfathered, and
I thought we approved her for C1.
I don't know.
She's zoned commercial
Any of
recreation.
these uses couldn't go under C1, and if not under C1 with a special use permit.
So there are some differences. One in particular of interest is that if you look through the allowable uses in hotels and lodging is an allowable use in CR, and it's identified by only in C1 as allowable uses also in CR. So there's actually, it's already captured in C1, everything. Well, the motel is not in C1, but it's captured by virtue of being called out as allowable uses in CR. And CR, wait, that's back. Yeah, no, that's right. CR allows motels and lodging, but it's not allowable use in C1.
Well, we've worked at trim, in the past we've worked at trimming Title 17, and this would be just more trimming.
Right, so there are other properties, there are other owners that are interested in that same zoning around Jennifer. Brett Coate being one of the primary landholders there is also interested in possibly expanding and having his property rezoned commercial recreation. So there is interest in it, it just hasn't happened. This is just a recent development. So I would advise against just completely mixing CR and adhering to what the council advises to do is kind of just to hone down on what is allowable in there. And for particularly to be recreational uses like those identified in these items for consideration. And I mean, we can still take out things like automobile parts and supplies. I don't do that for enjoyment. I don't know anybody that does really. And there's some other things that we could take out, but I think that we should look at adding more uses. So we kind of have a broader definition of what is an allowable use within the CR, as opposed to just completely eliminating it. Because there are, I don't know that Jennifer would agree with us. I can't say she wouldn't with your statement, but I don't know that she would. She is the only property owner that is zoned CR currently, but there are others looking to be zoned CR.
What
And I
are
think
the
if we-
properties zoned that are potentially, Mr. Coates, intending to switch to CR? What advantage does that give them?
So I think that, I don't know exactly what his game plan is, but it appears that he might want to lease out those properties to others that want to do commercial recreational activities.
What's his current zoning?
Arlo.
But couldn't he be rezoned to C1 or C2?
He could potentially, yeah. In theory.
Either
And it
way, he's
was-
going to have to go through the process, but is it more palatable for the public or for the commission or the town to accept the CR zoning rather than C1 or C2? Because CR
Right.
allows for, did you say it allows for hotels or it used to?
CR does, but C1 does not.
Yeah, I meant CR, if that's not what
Yeah.
I said. So, I don't know if that's an advantage or something that's more palatable than C1 or C2.
So how did the hotels in Pinetop get designated with CR within businesses?
So they're all C1, but by virtue of being allowable use of also what's allowable in CR. And so C1 is actually the most liberal by far zone that we have. It allows commercial, residential, R3, single and multifamily, R3, and then R2, which is I think that was single, and R3 is multi. So it allows basically everything and commercial recreation. So these other subzones are kind of a subset of what commercial recreation or commercial allows rather. But they're more specific. They're more specific.
What kind of race was it before it got changed? What was it zoned?
I don't know. I think it was Arlo. I think.
I remember talking about that in the past too.
See, so it went from Arlo to CR, and now we're gonna not to the detriment of Coates. He may not be able to do it. I mean, he may be able to apply, he may not. So I think we should keep it. It's just torn it down. I mean, I've been trying to do this for the past 2 years, trying to get this done.
So you're in favor of approving the list that's written here?
No, it's not changing on it.
Okay, well, let's talk about that next. But I'm also of the opinion, if council's directing us as a commission, we are at the behest of the council to refine CR zoning instead of eradicate it, then I'd say let's move forward, do a list and.
Right, and we basically almost cut all the meat out of it last time with our first recommendation, and they didn't like that idea. So they don't want to get rid of it, they just want to further drill down the particulars and what is an allowable use.
And Richard, I did many meetings ago about this, I suggested to, or one of us suggested that we just remove the zoning and leave Camp Grace grandfathered into that prior use. And I don't remember what the outcome was, but we didn't all agree to go forward with that. And in retrospect, I can see that now. That makes sense. So,
But do we want to limit the rest of those things that could very well be of good commercial use? Say that 10 acres that's on the corner between Camp Grace and Wagon Wheel Lane.
Right.
I could see a bank being there, or a taxidermist, or another medical facility, especially right next to the atrium.
Right, or it could be a gas station or anything, I don't know if we want to see that.
Why, that's kind of the whole commercial corridor going down through there.
Right, but I think that we have enough gas stations, just in that, using that particular.
Yeah.
well, I would say let's leave it open and not be restrictive to some degree, and just
Right.
pick and choose what we
So it's
want.
already kind of, if you look at the uses that are already there, and so we'd basically be opening up the door to more uses. We're taking out, 4 items? Automobile parts and supplies, banks, taxidermies, and offices. And those are up for debate even too. But we're adding so many more uses than we're taking away. So we're really adding to the commercial recreational if we were to consider these items. But it kind of drills it down more to a recreational use type. And I think that's why that specific zone was born, and it lives in that area because that's what an ideal location between Pinetop-Lakeside and Sholo. It's right in the middle, basically. What do we want there? What do we want when people first come to town? 'Cause that's what they're going to see. The rim and what? Other commercial recreational activities, or are we going to see an automotive dealership or parts store or a gas station? I think that's really what this zone is
How
trying
are
to
we
do.
defining future zoning for, say, a 10-acre parcel at this point too? That's really far-sighted, but part of our job as and our general plan, to
Right.
kind of predict and try to steer where we're going. But as an individual private landowner, if they're wanting a specific use that doesn't conform to CR, they're going for C1 or vice versa. I don't see how having CR in the code hurts us with the limits that we have here. It just might change the course of an applicant for what zoning they're looking for, depending on their use, and it might be more challenging to do one over the other.
Right. But it doesn't completely open the door to being as liberal as C1, where anything goes in C1 pretty much.
In the past, our public has been very strongly positioned about their feelings regarding zone changes.
Right.
And would we all agree that CR is a more palatable zone change?
I would agree with that statement.
I think it is. So maybe that would be one of the secondary reasons to have CR zoning in place for somebody that has an opportunity. So I move on and ask Tim to say what suggestions do you have for this list in terms of revisions or additions?
Well, like dance studios, martial arts studios, I think we can try to find some way of condensing some of these into one.
Those items come straight out of the APA definitions. They have 2 different lists. If you look on the first sheet for commercial recreational definitions and uses, they have indoor and outdoor uses, and so some of those are kind of repetitive, but and maybe there's a way to condense that. But I don't know. Is martial arts be considered a sport? So we could say sport activities or something like that, indoor or outdoor sports.
I mean, the studios, should we just put studios or schools or something? Because that way people could have a school for a real estate school. They could have something else.
Right. These were geared towards, I think, children's amusements. That's the section that they were found in. Children's amusements, dance studios, instruction, music schools, and instruction. Then it goes on to also add martial arts studios. So. But I really like the APA definition, and if you read all these other ones, they pretty much borrowed from that too. You can tell whether it's indoor or outdoor.
But anyone can go after a zone change, correct?
Anybody can, but what we've seen in the past is it doesn't necessarily, even if you guys approve it and the council approves it, could also go for a referendum and be shot down.
See, a jewelry store is not recreational though, that's in here. I mean,
Right.
do we want to put like recreation shops and recreation stores? That way it's at your discretion.
Yeah, I think even if we take that out, I think one of the concerns is, well, what if I want to, sell treats or snacks or whatever at my dance studio or whatever, what have you? And so those could be captured under other support facilities
I mean, maybe like
for
a.
whatever business they're operating that falls within the commercial recreation.
But if they're doing like a martial arts studio or something like that, they get a special use permit to have like a fundraiser or something like that. That would be totally different than selling it every single day.
Right. You could get a what is it? An event permit, a special event permit. Yeah.
For a couple times a year, it's
You
not
could.
done every day.
You could, but then we're limiting it though again.
Yeah, but they're coming in
What if
as
somebody wants to sell soft drinks at the martial arts studio year round? Because people get thirsty after beating each other. I don't know.
So your main goal here is to condense this list.
Well, that was what we started with, and then it came up. And then when we did just that, Tim. We took everything out and left it as what did we leave? A and Z, I think, which basically eliminated everything, left it up to my discretion. Council didn't like that. They wanted a palette of identifiable uses. They kind of like what's here. They said, yeah, maybe we take away some of these, but let's add more. So we have more uses identified. So it's not really just, the onus isn't on me to say, oh, well, that doesn't seem right, because that could easily go to somebody who disagree with my decision, and then it's gone to the Board of Adjustment next. So instead of wasting that time, I think that it is worth our time up front to put in the effort to say, yeah, these are allowable uses and they have recreational value.
And if someone else would have a different use, then they could come before the board.
Right, so other similar uses as determined by the Director of the Planning and Zoning Commission, that item's still in there.
So
So if
why
there's
does
something
it
a little
need
different.
any other item than that?
That was what we came to initially. That was the conclusion we came to initially. But they want a broader definition, a broader palette, so every single item isn't left up to me or you guys to make that decision.
And we were
It's
trying to
time
reduce it.
when it comes when people start using the commercial recreational zoning more.
We were, but I think the
Yeah.
sentiment from council is that if you don't give them some list of ideas or types of uses,
Right.
then it's too wide open.
Right.
And this gives it.
So how do you identify
It's
similar
almost
uses
ordered.
if you have nothing there?
Yeah, they're right. Similar doesn't mean anything without having something to compare it to.
Precisely.
So it makes sense, and we have really truncated our code so much that putting a little bit back in here, I don't feel bad about it. Because I think that's what council wants, I think it makes sense, so. This is an action item tonight, isn't it, for
It
consideration?
is. Yes.
So, I'll jump out there and make a motion to amend Title 17, Chapter 17.60 Commercial Recreational Zoning District to include the list provided at our meeting tonight, including item C of the original zoning for consideration, hunting clubs through offices and indoor and outdoor sports through other what is that?
Support facilities. Other support facilities.
Oh yeah, support facilities as the new defined zoning for CR.
I second that.
Second by Tim.
Yeah. So that would be removing automobile parts, detracting the list of negatives here, or removing full
Yeah, I was
as well?
saying
Okay.
just an inclusive list
Okay.
of just what I
Got it.
stated.
Just wanted to be clear.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion by any of the commissioners or staff? Oh my goodness.
I would say, we talked about it before, usually they're closed at night, they're night closed. Then you're gonna have a child daycare, if they're open late at night, with a bar next door or a nightclub.
Daycares are not usually open late at night, Tim.
Right, that's what we discussed before, but I mean, what if they're having a special event, which they can do later, or some people, we're gonna go to the bar, we'll have the daycare to take care of them.
I agree that it's a distant hypothetical and possibility.
Right.
And I would say let's leave that up to the community development director at the time. And you know, all commercial projects are coming before the commission anyway, so we would have a chance to handle that in the future.
Yeah, at a minimum, you guys would see a site plan and come for approval.
Okay, then let's go to vote. All those in favor of said motion? That's 1, 2,
Aye.
5, and James and Allison, you, and then any opposed? Richard and Allison opposed. 1, 2, 3, 4. So 5, 4, so that motion would pass, and we'll move that on to council. Did you get that voting down?
5-2? Is that what you said?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, 5 to total of 7.
He had said 5-4,
Oh,
but it's 5-2.
my words sometimes don't match my brain. So 5-2, thank you. Okay, then let's move on to new business item D2, information and discussion regarding the general plan. A, review and discussion regarding current zoning and future land use maps.
So one of the items that came up during, what was it, the council retreat was that they had tasked me with starting the general plan again. Everyone's favorite subject. Anyway, so when I was looking at the general plan, I don't think it was that bad what was done before, but I do have concern regarding the actual land use element. So what they, and I brought this to their attention, that basically what we have, if you could start up the maps, and I don't know if you can see these, James, but they're in the packet, so you should be able to.
Yeah, thumbs down.
Okay, so basically, what we're looking at is a major amendment, so to take recommendation from you guys and a super majority of the council. This is not an update of the general, it's not an update, it's a major amendment. And all that we're going to be dealing with is the land use element. Because I think most of it is done fine, and I think that at a later time we'll take this to a consultant to look at in 25 or before that, probably in 24. So, but anyway, what I saw on the future land use map is basically this is not a plan. This is an inventory of our current zoning map. And so if you go forward to the current zoning, it matches up identically with this, other than what's in the county. And even in the county, it shows what's there. It's already. So this is not a plan, in my opinion. This is an inventory of 10 years ago. There's no forethought. There's no foresight in it as far as what we want, what direction we want to go. And in particular, if you look at the tract by Wooden Lake Park of open space in the Big Springs area, that's designated as open space, and then the tract over by Camp Grace, all that is designated as forest. But there's no distinction on what type of uses or density goes into the forest area. So what goes there? And one of the requirements is of the general plan is to dictate densities for different zones, but there's no, and I wasn't a part of it, so I don't know the thought that went into it, but there's no verbiage on what density is allowable in the forest. Is it open space? Because we couldn't designate it as open space because the Forest Service doesn't recognize zoning. So there's no way that we could have did that, even though I think that was the thought at one time. So I don't know if that's why it fell to forest, but still, a forest, what is allowable use in the forest? Is it a campground? What is it? We don't know. There's no density illustrated whatsoever. So that's my primary concern, is that this was not a forward-thinking document. It was an inventory. Everything else that was put into, like the thought of and the verbiage of everything else in the general plan, I think it was very well thought through, but this part I think fell through the cracks. And I'm not sure because I wasn't a part of it, but I think so. Basically what the council tasked me with was to relook at the land use element and just start brainstorming with you guys and see what you think. But I do want to show you, if we could we advance to the zoning map?
Is it this one?
If you guys can take it,
This
yeah.
one or this one?
It's this guy, he's zoning. Like, keep this in your mind, and then when we go to the zoning map, you'll see what I'm talking about. There's no difference of what was there in 2015, and the zoning that's on that map and the zoning that's on this map is almost identical. There is some difference for the commercial, and my question was, how are we recommending zone changes if it doesn't match up with the general plan? Because that's one of the state statutes that we have to abide by. And so if we don't forward think, if we just say, well, this is an inventory of what we have, then that's what it's going to be for the next 10 years. So I think that we should look closely at that. And that's where I want to start with tonight, is just brainstorming kind of what you guys think, what you would like to see in the future. And then at a later time, we'll bring it back and say, we'll start looking at it again and say, okay, well, these zones should be zoned this way, and what does that mean if it is forest? There's no density associated with that, so that shouldn't have technically even been there, in my mind. Because that's the main reason for this document. It's not to marry up with zoning. It doesn't have to match zoning, and that's pretty much what happened here. It's identical. But it should be a planning document, a planning tool that shows you the types of densities that could go in there. So it doesn't say specific zones and say, oh, this is commercial and that's what we want to see here. It could, but it would have to tell me what type of densities in it as well, because as you know, in the commercial zone, it could be anything, right? It could be commercial, it could be residential, it could be single family, multifamily, we don't know. So anyway, what I would like to see is us just take a closer look at this and really think about it. Maybe we don't do that all tonight, but maybe I think we get it started. So I'm not asking you guys, obviously, to make a motion on this. I kind of wanted to do this as like a study session just to see what you guys think. Where do you want to see the town go in 10 years? Because what we do here could very well be in the 25 general plan as well.
Tim, the redevelopment areas I see on the map there doesn't show on our map in our pamphlets.
I think that's the zoning map. And
Yeah, this is the zoning map, so there's no.
it's a different map.
You're probably looking at Arlo.
Oh, no future land use map.
Is it this one?
Okay, yeah, the land use
There's a
plan
second one in there.
is the second one, and that was actually done. This one I think is much more forward thinking. This was done in 2004 by an outside engineering consultant firm, URS, and I think that what they're showing is way more of a plan than an inventory that we have. So what I would like to, as a starting point, is to look at that, because that was done for Navajo County and us, and I think this was part of the Growing Smarter Arizona initiative that started in the late 90s. And that's how the general plan was born out of that legislation. And so this was like a second look, a second glance at the initial Growing Smarter Arizona initiative from our initial very first general plan. They came back with this 5 years later and said, this is what we think Pinetop-Lakeside could go towards in the future. And somehow we lost track of that, and we just took an inventory of what we had and said, we're good with what we have. And, basically, it almost casts us in that same light as we don't want any development. We have we have the zones that we're happy with, and we don't want to change this dark plan to stay the same. That's kind of how I look at it as an inventory. So I don't know, because I wasn't part of that general plan process, and maybe I'm completely out base, but that's what it appears to me.
Well, in retrospect, I think Tim, myself, Richard, maybe John, can remember going through the general plan for like a year, and I think it became
Like 2 years.
Yeah, it was a long time, and our overall objective was to reduce it to the point where the public would actually read it,
Right.
and pay attention to it.
I think a lot of that it shows in the text, in the
We
clarity of
reduced it
that.
from 60 some odd pages to a
Right.
6-sided pamphlet.
Right.
So it was a huge.
And it
undertaking.
passed, right? Obviously.
Yeah, so we really revamped that, worked hard. I think it was under Chairman Jarko back during that time. Anyway, we put a lot of effort and time into that, sacrificed. So, not to say that it can't be improved at all.
Right.
It certainly needs to meet minimum minimum standards, and I'm all for getting it to that point. But I think that goes to show the intent of why it turned into what it did back in 2016.
So that makes sense for like the language and the verbiage of everything, kind of to get it digestible for the public. But it doesn't answer.
Jennifer's on.
Doesn't answer the question of how basically the zoning map is the land use map. Everything else, I think that it's done pretty well, actually. It's very well thought through, other than the few things that I mentioned, the land use map and the identification of the density for some of the zones, or not zones, it's not zones, some of the areas identified within the general plan.
When's the next revision due?
25. So this isn't, we're just going to do a major amendment. This is not the revision. We're not starting on that. And my idea for that is not to task the Planning and Zoning Commission with that, actually to hire a consultant. So you guys wouldn't be buried in this for 2 years. It would be a consultant presenting to bring forward what they find, and then you guys voting on it, whether you like it or you hate it, or what do you want to see changed. So it would remove that burden from the Zoning Commission, but you'd still have say in it. So any thoughts on, with that being said, any thoughts, any areas where you would like to see changed, or what do you guys see for future needs?
Well, in the park, they talk about putting some buildings there for the town, like.
That's still in the works. Are we talking Mountain Meadows?
Right now they can't do that because it's not zoned for commercial or like recreational stuff. It's open. It's open space.
Right, a park could be considered open space.
Yeah, but if they want to put
Or floodplain.
If they want to put the ice skating rink or put some of these things, then technically they have to come back and change the zoning since it's open space and it's not commercial.
I think that's debatable, because I think the park is open space, and they're not really they're not selling anything there at the park. It's just you go there to use it for free. We could have a municipal zoning, something like that, but that would be dealt with in zoning. It's really a overarching use. What is our plan for that area? Yeah, we want to see it a park, right? It's already designated as open space, so open space is the trails that go through their open space is Mountain Meadows.
If they put this skating rink in, then it won't be open space. I mean, they're going to charge us to have it, people use it.
Right. So, I mean, with that argument, is a baseball field not open space? Or a basketball court?
They're not charging people to play.
They could have tournaments, and the fields were under design, and that was the initial thought, was that they would hold tournaments there. And because they weren't, we had to spend a bunch more money to re-engineer and resize those fields so they were adequate for the tournaments, because they were undersized.
And we went round and around for probably months trying to define open space, because the preconception that it means undeveloped. But open space does not preclude development.
Right. So what I saw in the statute is it's basically minimum. You can't take somebody's property, so it gives them the minimum of basically what we have in our law, 1,000 square foot home per acre minimum, I believe. Does that sound correct?
I think it does.
So it doesn't completely preclude it, but it does prevent stuff like, multifamily. It prevents stuff like developments, heavy commercial, or developments like the movie theater coming in the middle of the park. That's not going to happen. And the underlying landowner has to agree to that, like I mentioned earlier. It's not something that we can cast against a big portion of the town without them signing off on it. Because it's basically a taking at that point.
My brain's dead, but I can't think of, were there music festivals that in parks they put up one of those things?
Sure.
I can't think of the name of it.
Tent.
No, like Colorado, they have a stage.
Amphitheater.
A what?
Amphitheater.
Right, so there actually is an amphitheater in the works for the nature center. I've seen the plans, and they got a bunch of money to actually build a amphitheater back behind the nature center.
But they'll come back before us to approve it.
Well, we already rezoned it, so they could do that. So we've rezoned it commercial. last fall.
Why wouldn't that be CR? Just saying.
It could be. It could have been. It could very well could have been. That wasn't a request though, so I don't know. I think they could have fell into commercial recreation. I think amphitheaters would have fell in there.
Would that have been an action that would have further or more protected the town? In retrospect, hypothetically?
I don't know. There was almost zero resistance against that zone change. There was one person that said that it was going to increase crime and traffic, but they didn't turn to the council meeting.
I remember
And I
that.
don't think it was warranted.
And they did have a precise development plan of which they can't veer from. So
Right.
we felt confident in that zoning change at the time.
Right.
But you're right, if it had crossed our minds to do CR instead of,
I think that's before we started on that down that avenue. Before we started
so
super
maybe that's another reason that we might want to have CR and like we've voted for tonight is for a potential change that's a bridge between, a C1 or C2.
Right. So it still has some of those uses that are allowable, but it doesn't have everything. It's not quite as liberal as C1.
How did you propose to correct the density?
That needs to be identified. We have to identify that. What I'm proposing is we completely eliminate forest because there's no density to it. That we eliminate that as a part of our general plan because it's what is it? Is it open space? I don't know. What was the thought? Because it's not identified, and so
Well, I think
I would
we
suggest
wanted
we
to
eliminate
limit it to open space regulations, so we left it for future developers to decide on their own what's best for that parcel.
Is that what it was?
Yes. Thanks for confirmation. I
But
appreciate
but with that being said, there still should have been a density requirement, like a threshold that has to be under this density to be considered forest.
it. Well, if a
Or is it
developer,
match up?
landowner came in with a plan and for a zone change, then we would be able to limit it to the density of that zone
Right.
that's requested.
So let's go back to the exercise where we, and last year before I was here, and the rezoning of the RV park, that did not match up with the general plan. That should have not even been pushed forward because if I was the director at the time, I would have brought to your guys' attention and the manager's attention that that does not match up with the general plan. And that's the same thing that you guys can start to get from feedback from the public. Because it doesn't. It shows it as forest. It doesn't show it as a density that would allow an RV park. So with that being said, I think that that's a prime example of why we should reconsider
Because it was
or identify
forest,
density
though.
at a minimum.
It
At
was
the time,
forest before.
it was forest, but the general plan is not an inventory. It's a plan of what we want to see there in the future, and that's my main argument.
So then, let's go back and look at this in a global perspective. Why have a general plan?
Right. Number one, we're required to by state statute. Number two, it gives us a guiding principle of when people come for zone changes, we can look at that and say, well, it doesn't match with the general plan, I can't recommend this. Or yes, it matches with the general plan, we can recommend this for approval. It's
I
basically
agree.
the
But
guidance.
as a town, we would want a general plan to control and limit the growth
Right,
and segregate different uses in different places
right,
and keep uniformity. It's got a great purpose, but in our town, it's not as easy to implement.
true.
A one-road town, so to speak, it has a challenge with a general plan in terms of future development.
Right. And there's maybe not large, but a very loud group of people that don't want to see any development. And so how do we plan for development when people don't want to see any
And
development?
they'll oppose any development plan that's brought forth.
Right. But if we have a plan that shows that, hey, these are the densities allowable, that doesn't say, well, this is basically open space, because that was the argument, well, this is open space forest, and that's what we want to see there. So if you don't give us that, we don't want it improved.
So the group that's fighting the growth, maybe someone will have a larger group that will promote the growth. Let's put it that way.
Possible. We haven't seen it work out.
If you're in charge,
Well, because the businesses out there, they want growth. They want new restaurants. They want new businesses.
yep,
They're taking
and we
the
just
brunt of
limited
everything,
it.
is what they're doing. And if we limit what we can bring into town, then you're not going to get any growth.
But I don't think that's
You know
the
what I mean?
intent. We're not trying to limit new development. We're
It's really just to guide it.
control it and guide it to the right spots.
But if we say this is what it is, we have an inventory of forest and there's commercial along 260 and that's all that we want to see in the future, then I don't see that as a guiding document. I see it as an inventory.
But couldn't you put multiple zones in there?
You could.
So in other words, you
how
could
did-
have A, B,
Right.
C, D.
Right, and so the general plan doesn't necessarily have to marry up with the zoning. It shouldn't actually. It's not the same document. It's not the same tool. Really, it's to guide the zoning, but it's not zoning. So it should have a list of densities, maximum or minimum densities, or both, that are allowable in different planned areas. So an array of different zoning could go in there.
Yeah, so what I'm trying to, here's what I'm trying to figure out. Let's say a certain store wants to go in. So what do they have to do? Look at the map and say, okay, we can only go here, 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 here?
Pretty much, yeah.
There are-
Or could they kind of go, if you're zoned 1, 2, 3, 4, A, B, C, D, then they all have more of an option on where to invest their money and build their building.
Or investigate what's available that will fit their needs. Sure.
You
In terms of
know what I
infrastructure,
mean?
land size.
I mean, we're almost like, it sounds like you don't want growth. You want to restrict them to the growth.
So that's not the intent. The intent is to identify what densities are allowable. If we don't do that, then we have no way of dictating what zoning is allowed there. And the zoning is what dictates what you're talking about. It shouldn't be the general plan. The general plan should be just our guide just to lead us to
You're
what
making
different zones are.
suggestions,
Right.
is mainly
Right.
what y'all are
But
doing.
And
what
the
the
intent's
general
not to
plan
limit it.
dictates is required, and we can't veer from that. So we have to choose carefully when we
Right.
go to the general plan.
Right, it's almost more important than the individual zones, because we can change an individual zone, well, if it matches up with the general plan, right?
Right.
If it doesn't, then we can't change it. So,
How would an RV park not be considered commercial recreational?
it's not zoned commercial recreational, it's zoned, or, well, it was zoned R low initially, right? But
Well, no, it
in the
was
general
forest or
plan,
open
it's
space.
forest, right? So it's not commercial recreational per se, because we didn't identify it in commercial recreational. Now, if we brought that item back at a later date and said, well, recreational vehicle kind of fits into the commercial recreational, we could amend the uses and identify that as one of the commercial recreational uses or any other zone.
Without a general plan, I might suggest that I've seen towns without it in the past, maybe even a similar look as like Wagonville has, where you're going through, you just see a barrage of multiple uses and it's
Right.
chaos.
Yeah.
So that's what a general plan is intended to avoid.
Right.
And make a free-flowing, peaceful, more,
Right. Instead of just
Like
letting
it's
sprawl,
environment.
whatever you want goes.
So
But
much
isn't
like
that-
an HOA.
If you're willing to build it, have at it.
But isn't that difficult after, I mean, the town is essentially built. You know, what?
There are a few areas that remain unbuilt. Aspen Meadows, this area over by Camp Grace. So there's
Right,
areas.
which now we're restricting, the areas that,
So what we actually did was expand the uses for commercial recreation.
well, but not for
Further than what's currently
C1.
allowed.
That should, I mean, you look at, I'm sorry to beat this dead horse.
Go ahead.
You look at this map and it is red, 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 red,
Right.
red, red, the whole way down 260.
Okay, which one are we looking at? The zoning map or the general?
Any
plan?
of them.
Yeah, because they're basically identical, right?
Right.
Inventory.
Until you get to the Camp Grace area.
It's easy to see on the future land.
And I have a burr in my bonnet on that whole thing because we were, just because, but I don't understand why that's not also C1. It's just crazy to me.
I think it's probably along the same thoughts that were mentioned earlier, that it's an easier sell as commercial recreation, which kind of hones down the allowable uses as opposed to just opening the floodgates as commercial C1.
Well, it's difficult to do business, to build in this town as it is.
Right.
So, I mean, we're just making it harder.
Yes.
Is what's happening.
that's
And
what-
I thought we were supposed to be making things easier.
And I agree with you, Allison. That's the last thing I want to do is harder for people to
And
get
it's
from.
way
Well, if
harder.
more businesses
So
shut
one of the
down,
things that-
the city's not gonna add the money to operate. The revenue's not gonna be there.
So
You know what I mean? I mean, you only have a
that-
certain amount of revenue coming in from the city. And we're operating as a pretty large city, to tell you
And it
the
does
truth.
depend on the use,
Okay.
but I can see that point.
Yeah, so I mean, that's a whole nother conversation really. Yeah, we have a population of 4,000 people. It's less than Eager, where I was. I don't believe that, because if you look outside, there's way more activity here. There's way more going on. There's at least 10,000 people in this community that are using services that we're providing services for that we don't get state share revenues. But that's a conversation for another day.
Hey, I'd love to see White Mountain Summer Homes, Pinetop Country Club get annexed into the city. I think it would be the best thing to ever happen.
Well, it has been discussed as.
Why hasn't it been pursued?
So there's not enough revenue for those areas.
The council, to answer your question, Mr. Kenton, the council has considered it, but they came to the conclusion that Pinetop Country Club wasn't the cost benefit ratio just wasn't there, because we don't collect property taxes. The county does, regardless if it's in the town or if it's in the county. So that's not an added benefit to us. We have to provide services. We have to provide services to snowplow, roads. So the cost, maybe one day it will be there. But that was the initial analysis, that the cost benefit wasn't there. Now other areas in Lakeside, sure, and maybe some of that's captured on the land use plan that identifies Lakeside, which the county, or this one here, URS, it has everybody. It has us in the county in that for our whole area.
Some of those
That's why I
county
like it.
items certainly should be considered at some point in the future.
Right.
It makes sense.
So that's
So how far did we own up 260 toward Home Depot and all that? Did we own Home Depot and all that at one time? No?
I honestly don't remember how far it went.
You mean the city limits?
But like U-Haul, over here, U-Haul's in the county. It's right on the highway, but it's in the county. So there's like,
I think we ended.
I think we end about at U-Haul-ish.
Yeah, so
It
the
picks
area, it's interesting if you guys look at the map. It ends, where's it end? At Rainbow Lake, and it goes out to, it heads north and it goes around Coyote Lane, way out in the middle of nowhere. And then, if you're driving, you would think you're in the county, but you're actually in Lakeside, and then it wraps back down in the Maverick Center. So that whole area in between
Going up
is county.
260, I think the city limits ends at Wagon Hill Road on the west side of
It
260.
does, and Mountain Gate is the last subdivision.
Mountain View.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Mountain Gate's in the city,
Right,
but that's the end of it.
right.
So Camp
And
Grace
the
is
city has tried to, and north of that is where they're going to close Wagon Wheel. And the city at one time tried to annex Wagon Wheel and got shot down.
All right, let's get back to the, because we have this as an agenda item, so we have to focus on,
Yeah,
we have to focus on that. Next time we'll probably do it as a more informal, so we don't have to worry so much about maintaining,
See, all this is county.
but for now, we need to focus on the general plan. We need to focus on the general plan and not annexations. Although it has a part of it, but it's not really the agendized item. So let's stay on track, guys. So any thoughts that you guys have? Where do you see the land use projected? And what I don't want to see is an inventory. I want to see, when people look at this, that it is forward-looking, almost like the one in 2004 from URS. Maybe that's a starting point. We start there, and then we start looking at specific areas. I think that's what maybe that's what we'll do next time, if you guys are open to that idea, and we can have this run as more of like a study session, where it be more informal. We would have to abide by all the meeting laws. We could have better discussions, and we can go out on tangents like annexations or whatever. It wouldn't matter. But for right now, we have. Go ahead.
I have a question. So I'm looking at the future land use map, and I'm looking over at Lily Creek. And so if you start by like Buxton's Road, the creek itself is highlighted bright green. Is that open space floodplain and then it stops when it gets down more in the forest? Is that correct?
So you're looking back by Billy Creek, is that right?
No, Box Spring Road.
Yeah,
Fox Creek.
Yeah, Billy Creek. So yeah, you got about screens, it goes down open space, floodplain, whatever. Does it matter, does it benefit by being able to carry that all the way down, like an open space? All the way down through Billy Creek?
And so,
Does that make sense?
it totally makes sense, James. Thank you. And normally what you see in most communities' general plan is that the open space areas are floodplain or parks, and so that would totally make sense in my mind, because it's basically undevelopable already. It's not a hard sell. It's just protecting the floodplain area and floodway.
We talked about it many years ago. I can't recall what year it was, but they talked about going all the way from Bug Springs all the way down to Lakeside along Billy Creek, but we had issues with property owners getting up their property rights near the creek for that to have a passageway, from what I recall.
Yeah, and they would have to sign that. They would have to agree to that portion of it because we can't zone open space without their permission. So I could see that as a potential obstacle.
Does it benefit if it's listed as, I guess if you look at it, look at the Billy Creek then all the way down to right when it hits that red mark. Does it benefit if it's even forest? Does it matter if it's already the forest? Then don't worry about trying to allocate it to open space. But does it matter? Is it like the same exact thing?
That's kind of my question too, James. I don't really know the answer to that, but it sounds like that was the thought initially. Is that correct? Because this is zoned in that area that he's talking about. It's zoned forest as well. So there's no density associated with that. So are we planning for? Are we calling it? We can't really zone it, but this isn't zoning. This is just a planning map. And someday potentially there could be a land exchange where that comes into the town and it's developable now. It's not enforced there. It's just like what happened over by Camp Grace.
And our predecessors, and probably including me, had the opinion that when that time comes, we will address the zoning of that parcel.
But we wouldn't be able to if it's zoned or if it's in the general plan as forest and there's no distinction of what that is. So we wouldn't be able to actually change any zone or give it a
We'd have to
zone.
do a major plan amendment.
Right.
So bringing in Forest Service land into private hands or town hands,
That is
we
one way.
cannot zone it.
We cannot zone it because the Forest Service doesn't recognize zoning. So we can plan for what we would like it to be zoned, but until that actually happens, and it would more than likely default to R-low, which is our closest to AG, which is the default after it comes into zoning statewide.
We've got to have the ability to allow private landowners and developers to do forest exchanges and build feasible projects on the land that they're buying. I don't see how we can just preclude it and say, never can you do anything with this because it once was Forest Service, because our general plan precludes that.
And we talked a few years ago about the Forest Service, the campground, that one day that will become public property to a private individual.
That has happened.
Oh, someone bought it?
Over by Camp Grace?
No.
No, the
Well,
camp.
Campground right across from the forest building.
Oh, no. I don't know what's going on there.
But that
We had a-
land
we had
exchange
code
took like
enforcement.
15 years or something.
Yeah, we had code
Like,
enforcement action on them to
So
make
then
them get rid of the fences. but
Maybe
I don't
we
know.
need
They could
to
very well. though.
request a legal opinion for the town's attorney to determine how we can transfer forest land to private hands in a proper zoning under the general plan that we have enacted. Because I don't see a solution there that's feasible for anyone coming to the town and saying, I want to do this, oh, never mind, I'll go somewhere else.
Other than what you identified, I think that's the only route. Going through a major amendment, redoing the land use map for that particular area. So if somebody was ready to go, shovel ready, had money and wanted to go, I mean, it could take us a year. to get it ready. That's why I think the time is now.
And that's why I think long-term, we have a general perception of being anti-growth, which I do not
Precisely.
think we are. Although a lot of our citizens are. As a commission, we are not. We want controlled growth that conforms with our general plan. So it makes sense to work on our general plan to make it more understandable, feasible.
So is it hard to get forest land into the city?
Yes.
It's a very long, drawn-out process because you have to find properties of equal value that you can give to them.
Oh, it has to
It
be a
only be a
swap.
trade.
It's the only way.
Really?
Right. Always has been, yeah, and it's very complex and it takes literally decades.
Huh. Okay.
Yeah. Again, that should be revised, that it's outside of our purview, but that would be a great solution.
With
to
plans in the future.
We do.
I was thinking of the property behind the two hippies. Beautiful park back there, it could be.
Yeah, that's what we're
Well,
talking about, the old campground.
That's what you're talking
That
about.
Yeah.
converted from Forest Service campground to private hands, yeah. And that took, I think, 15 years. And that's just been completed a year or two.
So the Forest Service owns that.
Used to.
I thought they still do own the
No,
campground.
I
they
thought they
still do
still
own
do.
the
They still
campground.
own
Yeah, because
They
they were
still
just
own the
camping there
campground.
last year. They own it.
But there's a portion in the back by Rainbow Lake that is private property. Because they've called me and asked me what they could develop there, so I know that that's private property.
It's a beautiful property.
It is.
Okay.
So any other thoughts, ideas, questions, comments, concerns, frustrations?
You didn't leave us open with any like future agenda items or
Right.
on the agenda. You probably should have those in there so we can just talk about potential future agenda items.
It was just, usually it is, but it's not.
It hasn't been on the last.
So that's what the phone's for. If you want a future agenda item, you call me, and we can talk about it. Or you stop by, and we can talk about it.
That's reasonable too. Any other further discussion on item D2 tonight?
No.
Next meeting.
So,
Okay.
so the next meeting we'll have it agendized outside. We'll end the regular planning and zoning meeting, and then just have a study session, so we don't have to worry about the constraints of open meeting law.
And my calendar had us planning for a May 26th P&Z meeting. Is that still consistent?
So the May 26th, it's up to you guys.
26.
There was a site plan review that was going to be coming in, but they moved it back because I requested a traffic analysis and a drainage report for a 27-unit apartment complex on 8 So that was pushed back to June, July
You know why?
because of my request for more information for the traffic analysis. And basically, there's only one way out, egress there off 8 and there's some right-of-way issues where it looks like there's right-of-way, but someone's been living in the right-of-way, it's not even a parcel, and they've been there for at least 25, 30, or even since the 70s, because that's the mobile home is from the 70s, and it's right smack dab in the right-of-way.
Okay. You said 27 units?
27 units, max out the density allowable for that, for the property. It's currently a single family, but these plans that I saw were actually done in 2004, so they've been sitting on these plans for almost 20 years, just waiting for the time. Initially, they came to me and they said, well, we want to do a low-income development, and so that's what I thought it was. But then when I met with him last week, he brought his partner and he said, no, we don't want to do that. We want to do market.
What's it zoned for?
It's zone was it R4, I think. Anyway, it's zoned for multifamily apartments. So there's no zone change requests.
Are they gonna make the single
Yes,
family
I
house
know.
there or move it?
It would be taken out, demolished. There's not enough room for it in what they're proposing.
So then maybe this is an appropriate time for me to say that I submitted a letter of resignation as chairman of the Planning and Zoning Commission.
We did not do request.
So that's official. And tonight will be my last meeting.
As chairman or on the board?
Chairman and member of the commission. I've been grateful to have had this experience, and I've been real happy working with the town. I've been grateful for everybody.
It's just time for me to.
Can we make a motion to accept it?
No, it's not on the agenda.
I make a motion.
So anyway, thanks everybody. I really appreciate your tolerance of me over the last like 9 years.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you. Yeah.
Your time.
Appreciate it.
Did you get a plaque or something?
No, I don't need a flag. The back's in the car.
Or a chair or something?
We could see. I don't know. We might have some money available.
I could make him a certificate.
We'll see what we can do. I can't
They used to
promise
do
you
plaques.
a rose garden.
Do they
We'll see.
anymore?
I can look into it.
They used to give plaques out.
We're all new here.
That's nice.
I have one that my wife has from 2013 hanging up in my office. So I know that what you're saying is most likely true.
Because 2003 they did.
Yeah. We'll see what we can do.
No worries, guys. Okay, anything else, guys? We're all good.
And we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.